I need some traction.
Great. So I'm Dan Olsen. It's a real pleasure to be here. I first spoke at Traction Conference last year, and I shared some advice from my book, Lean Product Playbook, on how to achieve product market fit. Today's talk basically is like the next chapter in how to basically use analytics to improve your product and business. Real quick about my background so you know where I'm coming from. I started out with a technical background in engineering, and I moved out to Silicon Valley a while ago to go to business school at Stanford. I wanted to leverage my technical background, get more on the business side. And right after business school, during business school, I discovered product management. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do. I asked everybody, where's the best place to learn product management? And everybody said Intuit. So I went to Intuit, had a great time there. I was a product leader there. And shortly after getting into product management, I realized how important UX design is. So I made it a point to learn that. And I've been coding since I was a teenager, basically. So I try to maintain my technical skills, too. After Intuit, I worked as a product leader at a few startups, and then I actually was CEO and co-founder of my own startup. It was called Your Version. It was a personalized news startup. We launched at TechCrunch, won the People's Choice Awards. And before that startup, and then after that startup, I do what I do now, which is consulting in product management and growth, and helping companies basically achieve product market fit, improve their metrics, and build strong teams. Some of my clients are Box, Facebook, Microsoft, Medallia. It's both B2B and B2C. And I'm also very passionate about sharing best practices. So over 3 years ago, I started a big monthly speaker series called Lean Product in Silicon Valley, where I live. We bring in the top speakers there. We also put the videos on YouTube. If you're interested, you can check out that channel. My Twitter handle is @Dan Olsen. I post all my slides, videos, and slide shares at dan-olsen.com, O-L-S-E-N, if you want to check out my other talks. So today and tomorrow, our conference is all about achieving traction. As we know, you don't achieve traction day one. And as I take a step back and think about, how do you go from starting to getting traction, I think of it as three main phases that you have to go through. And I want to walk you through those now. So the first is before you have product market fit. There's actually two sub-phases here. The first is before your product is live. So if you're working on your product, trying to get your V1 launch or MVP launched, you're in this phase. After you launch, it's not like you suddenly magically get product market fit the second you launch. As we know, it takes a lot of hard work. So that's the second phase. Phase two is, okay, after you've launched your product, it's live in the market, but you haven't yet achieved product market fit. And then the third phase is when you've achieved an adequate level of product market fit. And probably the best way to show the difference of these different phases is with a graph like this that shows on the vertical axis the number of customers that we have at that point in time from 0 to lots, where lots is whatever is relevant for your business. Maybe it's dozens, maybe it's hundreds, maybe it's millions. Or you could also think of it as revenue on the horizontal axis. And in phase one, before we've launched, we obviously have 0 customers. So we haven't yet, the hockey stick hasn't taken off yet. In phase two, we've launched, but it hasn't really gained traction yet because we haven't yet achieved a high enough level of product market fit. And then in phase three, that's where basically we've achieved enough product market fit that now it's really starting to go and gain traction. And the main thing here is to be mindful of which phase you're in. I know a lot of people get a lot of advice from other people, and one thing that I see is people are getting advice from someone who's in a different phase than you're in. And so it sounds great to them, like, yeah, this is what we're doing A/B testing, and then you try to apply it and it doesn't quite work or make sense. It's because you guys are in different phases. And one of the biggest things also is the tools and what you need to focus on for each of these phases is quite different. And one of the key differences is the difference between quantitative and qualitative learning. And let me walk you through this. So in quantitative, basically, this is like a numbers game. You don't actually care about what any individual user is doing. You're caring about, in the aggregate, what are thousands or tens of thousands or millions of users doing, so you can get averages and distributions and see what's going on. This is very much statistical, analytical, and again, you don't actually care what any one user is doing. You care about the numbers. And this is helpful at scale. And the person that, I like to kind of put a face to each of these approaches. And when I think of who's the master of being analytical and logical, the first person I think of is Spock. So the quantitative approach is basically the Spock approach. But before you launch your product, you have 0 customers, right? You can't do A/B testing with millions of people as much as you'd like to. And in fact, you need to rely more on qualitative techniques. You actually do want to talk to each user or customer and understand what their needs are and what their pain points are and how you can address those and how your product is doing, right? That rich qualitative data is very important. So here, instead of just looking in aggregate, you actually do want to talk to people one-on-one, interview them, understand what makes them tick and what their preferences are. And when I think about who's the best person at sitting down with someone, interviewing them, and getting to know them really well, the person I think of is Oprah. So we have these two fundamentally different approaches, the Spock technique and the Oprah technique. And if we go back to our diagram here and we say, hey, for each of these phases, what's the main goal here? In phase 1, before we've launched our product, our main goal is testing our hypotheses, right? Gaining confidence that what we're doing is fitting with customers. Getting to know, really understanding who our customers are ideally before we build. We're validating those things. And the kind of learning that you need to get there is mainly done through qualitative techniques. In the second phase, we've basically launched now, and our goal is we have our product in market. We want to improve our product market fit. And this is both a mix. We still need to be talking to customers because we haven't quite hit enough product market fit to take off yet. So we still need to be talking to customers. But now that we're in market, we can start using quantitative techniques as well, like analytics. And then in phase 3, it's mainly about growth. We've proven that we've got enough product market fit. It's about pouring more gasoline on the fire. And here, it's mainly quantitative, although it's still valuable to use qualitative techniques as well. And again, what I see a lot is someone who's in the growth phase will be talking to an entrepreneur or product person in phase 1 and saying, oh, here's how you do A/B testing, and here's how you do this. And those techniques just don't apply. So I'd love to hear from you guys real quick. Which phase are you in? Who here is in phase 1? You haven't launched your product yet. Could you just raise your hand? Get a sense for that? Okay, we've got a few people. Who's in phase 2? You've launched, but you haven't quite got that product market fit and traction yet. Okay. Who's in phase 3? Growth phase. Okay, great. So we have a nice even balance there. The fact that there are different tools and techniques and advice for each of these phases is part of the reason why I wrote my book, The Lean Product Playbook. It came out 2 years ago. I've got 2 copies I'm going to be giving away today, actually, to people here in the audience. The way to win is just a tweet. If you just send a tweet with my handle @DanOlsen, I'll pick the best tweet and I'll pick a random tweet, and I'll give those out to people. And if you want to throw a hashtag on there, like product management, lean startup, if there's a slide that you like or a framework that you like, a picture, that's pretty good. So I'll be giving those out at the very end. But we've been talking a lot about product market fit as the goal that we're trying to accomplish. The interesting thing is anytime you have some buzzword or terminology like this, it's interesting how people interpret it. Like MVP, you can find people having like debates online, like violent debates online about what an MVP is and what it isn't. I saw one post, it's like a landing page is an MVP, and somebody disagreed with them, and they're like, no, a landing page is not an MVP. Product market fit is a little different. It's really not that contentious. In fact, people talk about it almost superficially. It's like, oh yeah, Box succeeded because they achieved product market fit. Startup Y, unfortunately, failed because they did not achieve product market fit. They talk about it like this Boolean thing you either have or you don't have. But it's hard to find an article or post that really tells you how to explain it. And so that's why, again, also why I wrote this book. And I decided to create a framework, having worked on so many product teams and products over time. And that framework is the product market fit pyramid. And I want to walk you through it real quick. It's basically a 5-layer framework, a pyramid. And the idea is each layer is supposed to build on the previous layers. And it's a way to think about what are the key decisions or hypotheses that you need to get right in order to achieve product market fit. So the bottom 2 layers are the market. And the bottom layer is target customer. Everything starts with whose life are we trying to get better? Who are we trying to create customer value for? Because everything else is dependent on that. The next level up is what is that customer's underserved needs, basically. And those two together, basically underserved, and in the book, we won't get into it today, but I talk about how do you identify underserved. Obviously, if someone's getting a need met perfectly fine, probably not the best thing to spend our time and resources on unless we have a real good idea how we can be 10x better. But those two together, basically, if you go to a marketing textbook or an economics textbook, it'll say a market is a group of customers that share the same set of needs. So that's the market. Now, your product, I like to think of as 3 main decisions or hypotheses that you need to get right. And the first one is value proposition. So value proposition is great. Hopefully it connects with that needs layer. It's like, of those needs that we identified, which ones are we going to try to deliver for the user? And what's our plan for how we're going to be better or different than what else is out there in the market today? Your feature set, that's your functionality that actually conveys the benefits to the customers. And that's where the concept of MVP, minimum viable product, comes in, because we don't want to overbuild before we validated that we're heading in the right direction. UX is the tip of the pyramid, user experience design. That's actually what brings the feature set to life and what the customer interacts with to get the customer benefits. So So that's a product market fit pyramid. And when you have it, you can think of it again as a way to catalog the main decisions or hypotheses as you try to achieve product market fit. Basically, when you see it this way, product market fit is just, okay, the work that we're doing in the top 3 layers, the assumptions we're making, the designs, the code, the execution, how well does that resonate with the market that's out there, right? The market is out there. You can't change or control that. You can pick which one you want to go after, but you really control the top 3 layers of your decisions and execution. And once I had this framework, I realized I could turn this into a process to work through your key hypotheses. And basically, you just start at the bottom. Step 1 is identifying your target customer. Step 2 is getting clear on what underserved needs they have that you could address. Then getting clear on your value prop. Then figuring out what your MVP feature sets to be, and then coming up with the UX design. And we want to do the UX design for 2 reasons. One is we have to design it. We have to figure out how it's going to look and feel and how it's going to work to build the thing. But I'm a big believer also in validating with prototypes before you do any building or coding at all. And so once you have an interactive prototype, you can actually then close the loop. The step 6 is test with customers. Take your tappable or clickable prototype, go test with customers, and that's how you assess where you're at with product market fit. And this is an iterative process where we iterate over time. So that's really my talk at last year's Traction Conference went deep into this 6-step process, the lean product process. But today, as I mentioned, we're basically talking about both types of techniques. That was more the Oprah technique, where it's like, we have a brand new product idea or a brand new feature idea, and we're talking to customers, doing a lot of discovery and learning one-on-one in small groups with people. Quantitative, really, again, is talking at people at scale. And, people like to argue about which one is better or they have a preference for one or the other. The reality is both are valuable, and they complement each other, like yin and yang. So quantitative will answer the question, hey, what are customers doing or not doing? How many are doing it or not doing it? If you have a landing page, what percentage of people are clicking on the conversion button? That's quantitative. But you have no idea why they're clicking on it, or you have no idea why the ones that aren't clicking on it, right? And that's where qualitative comes in. It tells you the whys. And you can talk to customers and say, hey, why did you click on that button? And they'll tell you why. Or why didn't you click on that button? And they'll tell you why. But you won't know how many have that particular reason. So the two complement each other a lot. And actually, we can actually zoom out further beyond just quant versus qual. There's a second dimension that's helpful to think about as you're trying to learn and achieve product market fit and achieve traction. And this is a framework. So we have on the bottom axis, we have qualitative and quantitative. And qualitative is considered direct because I'm talking I'm talking directly to customers, whereas quantitative is indirect. And this framework, by the way, is from my friend Christian Rohr. He's a great design leader. You can check out his work at xdstrategy.com. The other dimension of how we categorize these different learning methods is attitudinal versus behavioral. And attitudinal is somebody telling you what they think or what they would do. Whereas behavioral is actually what they're doing, right? So I could do an interview for a product and say, hey, we're building a product for people, to help people be environmentally conscious. And the person I'm talking to would be like, I could be like, how environmentally conscious are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Oh, I'm a 10. I care about the environment a lot. And then the interview could end, they could walk out, they could take their Starbucks cup and just throw it on the ground, right? That's the difference between behavioral and attitudinal. So you have to be careful sometimes. What they say and what they do is a little different. But they're all useful. And what we can do is there's kind of like a prototypical learning tools in each of these quadrants. In the qualitative, attitudinal, that's user interviews. When you go out and talk to customers one-on-one and say, hey, tell me what you're doing today. Like say we're building a Salesforce competitor. How do you track your contacts today? How do you work your sales funnel today? What's important to you? What do you like? What do you not like? That's user interviews, customer discovery interviews. That's qualitative and it's attitudinal because we're not actually necessarily watching them do something for real. In contrast, usability testing, like if I said, hey, can I watch you use Salesforce? Or I have a prototype I'd like you to use. Or could you try to use our product and you actually watch them do it? Then now you're actually watching them behaviorally. And the reality is when you do a user test, there's usually a mix of attitudinal behavior. You're watching them do something, they're sharing their thoughts and opinions with you. Right? So these are both qualitative techniques that are useful. Talking to a lot of people at once, and we're not talking to them individually, but gathering feedback at scale, attitudinal feedback about what they're saying, that's where surveys come in. And in the book, I talk about how surveys are kind of a double-edged sword. They can be powerful if you use them right, but it's really easy to misuse them. And that's why I think you see people being very careful about how they use it. The one that's very popular is Net Promoter Score, NPS, and it's because it's very controlled how you ask it and how you respond. It's kind of hard to mess it up. And then in the upper right quadrant, we have quantitative and behavioral. So now this is what people are doing versus what they're saying, so that's really valuable. And it's not just one or two, it's at scale, right? So this is where analytics lives, and this is where A/B testing lives. And so again, all four of these, people can argue about which of these four techniques they prefer or is more valuable. But again, it kind of goes back to where are you in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 on achieving traction. And as I mentioned, my other talk last year was more on the qualitative side and the lean product process. It was a talk called How to Create Products for Growth. The video and slides are online if you want to check it out. But today's talk is building on that and assuming that we've launched and gone to market. And so we're going to get our Spock on, and for all you quantitative people out there. All right, thank you. Live long and prosper. And we're going to jump into what happens post-launch. Okay, we've gone to phase 2. If we're in phase 2 or phase 3, how can we really use the power of analytics to improve our product and business? And I have a process for this too, as a way to approach this systematically. The first, and I call it the lean product analytics process. The first step is to figure out what are our metrics, right? And when I think of metrics, and I help a lot of companies, there's kind of like this maturity model. Level 1 is we have no clue what our metrics are. Level 1 is we know what our metrics are, but we're not tracking them, and so on, right? So you want to start out with what are your key metrics that you care about. Then you want to instrument your site and make sure you're measuring the baseline values. Where are we today on each of these metrics, right? Make sure, and usually there's a metrics hygiene phase here where what you're tracking isn't what you think you're tracking isn't actually the real data, and you've got to clean up the data. And then you get to the point where you have, you're tracking the key metrics you care about, and you have high degree of confidence that you're tracking them accurately and have good baseline values. Once you get to that step, then what you want to do is look across the metrics and as a team identify which one do we think, how much upside potential does each of these metrics offer? How much ROI potentially can each of these metrics provide us if we try to improve it? And basically, this is all happening at the global level of your product or business. And once you as a team identify the top metric you want to improve, then we kind of go into a specific metrics optimization loop. So we'll say we've picked conversion rate as the top metric we want to focus on. Then we'll go into a metric-specific loop. And for that metric, we'll basically, as a team, use divergent thinking and try to brainstorm what are all the different ideas we have for how to improve that metric. Then basically, as a team, try to identify which of these ideas do we think offers the highest ROI. Then go design and implement it, roll it out, and see how the metric changes. And you hope the metric goes up and to the right. But even if it doesn't, there's been a lot of value because you've learned in the process of doing that what didn't work. Even you learn from what doesn't work as well as what works. And the whole point is iterative, right? So then you go try the next idea and so on. And eventually you will start improving the metric. And over time, you'll start to see diminishing returns. Almost always when I work with clients, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit if this hasn't been done. You can find things that have major impact with minor changes. But over time, it'll get harder and harder to improve that metric further. At that point, what you want to do is jump back to your global process and say, great, we optimized conversion rate. What's the next metric that offers the biggest upside potential and ROI to improve our product or business? And so that's the overall lean analytics process. I'm going to walk you guys through a couple of case studies and share some other frameworks for how to think about analytics. And one of the things that's very valuable is actually to have kind of a holistic framework of all the analytics that you could potentially improve. And my friend Dave McClure created Startup Metrics for Pirates, or R, quite a while ago. Who's heard of this before? Anybody? So some people have heard about it. Let me walk you through it. I created this version of the diagram to hopefully explain it a little bit more clearly. Step 1 is acquisition. That's the first A. So it's AARRR, acquisition. What does acquisition mean? Acquisition means getting prospects to visit you from different channels. You can imagine like getting someone to your homepage or your landing page. That's what acquisition is. Getting someone who's never heard of you guys before or has never been to your website or mobile app before, getting them to the front door. That's acquisition, basically. Step 2, activation, is taking those prospects and converting them into customers that are actually using your product. Right? So that's basically activation. I would call that conversion, but if it was conversion, it would be like ACRRR. It wouldn't quite say R. It'd be ACR. It wouldn't work as good for the Pirates part. Now, once they become users, they're using your product. That's the middle, right? They're using your product. And then hopefully, step 3 is retention. Hopefully, they keep using your product over time. Right? As you know, people not 100% of users come back and keep using your product. But if it's providing value for them, then they're going to come back and keep using it. So that's about how many of what percentage are we keeping active over time. Step 4 is referral, and this basically is your current customers, your active customers, either through virality or word of mouth, getting you new prospects. So there's a feedback loop there. And the importance of this particular metric, referral, can vary a lot. So if you're in like an enterprise software company targeting Fortune 1000, it probably isn't as big a deal as like one Fortune 100 company saying, hey, you really got to use this. I'm going to add you to my friends list, right? It's not going to work out. But if you're in a social product, right, like WhatsApp, Facebook, or you're a mobile app that requires free user acquisition and you have a low kind of monetization rate per user, referral can be very important. So referral is the fourth one. And the fifth one is revenue. By virtue of active users using your product, either directly them paying you or some other method, they're generating revenue for your business. So this is the cool thing about this framework is it's generic and it applies to any business. Hopefully you can see how this would apply to your business. And it's a great way to say, okay, great, which of these is most important for my business right now? And what you want to do is focus on the right high-level metric at the right time. And I call it the metric that matters most. At any point in time, one of those 5 areas will be more important and offer the best ROI for your business. So I'd love to, right now we can just quickly like pull this back up. If you want to take a couple minutes and maybe just partner up with your neighbor, and you guys could each spend a minute talking about using this framework. Which of these 5 do you think is a metric that matters most and why? Let's just do that for a couple minutes. All right. So the cool thing actually is retention rate. Is that behavioral or attitudinal? Behavioral. It's behavioral. You see, do they come back or do they not? Not if they say they would recommend or if they say they would come back, right? So that's good. Active users is good. One of the fundamental things there is active users. I have 10,000 and then I get 15,000 next month. Is that good or bad? It can be hard to track. That's what I call an atomic metric. It's just a number. Right? And if all of a sudden we get on TechCrunch, our active users could shoot up and be like, whoa, we did an awesome job. Our product just got 1,000,000 times better, but we didn't do anything. So in general, when you do metrics, there's the idea of a ratio metric where you normalize it somehow so that it's scale independent over time. And that's the interesting thing about retention rate. Active user percentage would be a way to normalize that, for example. Retention rate is another way to normalize that, basically. So great answers from everybody. Everything obviously is important. All the things that you mentioned are important. NPS is a way to track, is indicative, can be indicative of retention rate, but it is attitudinal versus behavioral. I personally, I'm a big fan. If you had to pick one metric, I would go with retention rate, basically. Because it tracks what percentage of people stay active over time. Like I could do a great job getting really clear on my target market and my value prop and messaging and create this amazing landing page, right? And I could get like 95% click-through rate conversion on my landing page. But then they went to so they loved the promise of the product. I nailed the promise and I got them to click and sign up. Maybe I even got them to pull out their credit card. But then they go and they use the product and the product is not good. They're not going to come back and use it. Right? So I can do a good job on acquisition and conversion, but retention really, the fact that somebody comes and tries your product and then decides to come back and use it again, repeat usage or retention, means that they liked it and it's creating value for them so that they're behaviorally coming back and using it again. Right? Conversely, if they come and use it and it doesn't meet their needs, they're going to abandon and they're not going to come back even though you did a great job selling them on the product. So that's why I like retention rate. And retention rate is also, it's a ratio metric, so it's a percentage that we track over time, and usually it's shown as a retention curve like this. So let me walk you guys through this. Basically on the vertical axis we have, for a given set of users, what percentage return over time, looking at increasing longer periods, right? And so on the horizontal axis we have time, days, weeks, months, whatever it is, since the first time they tried the product, first time they used it, right? And the first thing you see is that graph doesn't go to 100%. Why does it not go to 100%? Because sadly, a large percentage of people never come back after the first time. This particular retention curve is for a mobile app. Mobile is brutal, right? And so you can see here that like about 80% never use the app again. And then it decays over time, and it does one of two things at the end. It will either go all the way to 0. What does that mean? That means like all the water leaked out of your bucket, unfortunately. That set of users that you poured in the bucket, they all leaked out. Maybe they did it in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but they all leaked out. Hopefully, instead, what you get is you get an asymptote where it flattens out. Maybe at 2%, maybe at 5%, maybe at 10%, but it flattens out at some level, right? So again, if you've got a leaky bucket where only like 2% of people are still there after 90 days, it doesn't make sense to focus a lot of time and money on acquisition until you plug the bucket up, right? And this is mobile, so that's why, think about a mobile experience. Say I get you to install my mobile app. You go to the App Store, you download it, you launch it, you play it, you check it out once, and you close it. I'm now on screen 12, on your phone, in your pocket. Am I going to wake up the next day and go, oh, what was that app I did yesterday? I got to launch that. That's why there's so much like, hey, can you please approve notifications for me? They want some way to get back and remind you that they're there. It's very brutal. Now, when you first launch, you can just kind of throw all your users into one bucket or one bin and analyze the retention rate. But over time, as you get more and more customers and they sign up in different months, you want to basically segment them and see, hey, are the users that we got last month, are they better? Are they retaining better than the ones we got a year ago or not? And so that's where the idea of cohorts come in. Cohorts just means subdividing your customer base along some dimension. The most common dimension is time. Maybe by the month that they signed up. The people that signed up in January would be one cohort. People that signed up in February would be another cohort. But it doesn't have to be. It can be by acquisition channel. You may find that, hey, we're doing user acquisition on these 3 different channels, and we can see the quality. That's how you can kind of measure the quality a bit, is seeing the differences in retention curves by channel, for example. But let's do a quick analysis here. So this is how you would show cohorts. Each cohort would be its own retention curve on the same graph. So here we've got percentage of users returning, and now we've got weeks since they signed up and first used the product. We have 3 cohorts. We have cohort A, which is blue with the diamonds, cohort B, which is red with the squares, and cohort C, which is green with the triangles. Think about which of those cohort curves, if this was your product, which cohort curve would you rather have? If you'd rather have A, raise your hand. If you'd rather have B, raise your hand. If you'd rather have C, raise your hand. Did you guys have a secret meeting before this? And say, hey, when Dan asks the question, say C. Now, are you guys have PhDs in retention rate and cohort analysis? No. Your brains just know what the best cohort is. Why did you guys pick, for someone wants to say why they picked the green C over the other ones? Why did they do it?
Flattens out at a higher percentage.
It flattens out at a higher percentage. But come on, look at A. A started out really high, 50%. Come on.
Not too fast.
Yeah, right? It doesn't matter. So the funny thing is your brain knows that I don't care about all this noise. What really matters is what's the value at the end, right? Your brain just knows this, right? And that actually is what matters the most because, basically that at the end of the thing is basically a measure of product market fit. And when I give my Oprah talk, and it's very fuzzy, and it's like, yeah, I talked to 10 users, and I think we have product market fit, the quants, the Spocks go, Dan, how do you really know you have product market fit? So for you Spocks out there, I want to let you know that where that curve flattens out at that percentage, that is a direct measure of product market fit. And if it goes to 0, you don't have it. If it goes at 5% versus 10%, 10% means you got more product market than 5%, right? So that's basically, it's kind of like the gold standard for how you're doing on retention and product market fit is where's that percentage? And we'll talk more about that. Some people wonder, well, how do I track this data? It's not super complicated, but I like to show this because some people like to get their head around it. Is basically, this is monthly cohort. So each monthly cohort of users is a row here. And then what you do, instead of having set months like June, July, August, you put month 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you index for each group based on when they joined. And this particular one is color-coded so that, basically, the darker the blue is, the better, the higher the number is. And you can see, for example, that they've improved their month 0 or month 1 retention rate quite a bit over time. From month 1, say, from 23 to 38%. And that's what you want to do, is improve your retention rate over time. Because that means, basically, that you're improving your product market fit over time. So let's talk about, well, how would this play out? So say we launched our product 2 years ago, right? And it was our MVP, and it was our best effort, and this is the retention curve that you have. We were only, after 12 months, we were only holding on to 5% of users. So our bucket was, luckily we still held some water in it, but it was still kind of leaky. In the 6 months after we launched, we went and talked to customers and listened to customer service and looked at the analytics, and it added value and fixed bugs and made it more relevant and more useful and improved product market fit. Hopefully what we would see is that our retention curve goes up over time when we look at a distinct cohort later on after we've done all this nice hard work to improve our product market fit. And this cohort would have a higher terminal value basically, right? And then in the 6 months after that, we worked hard again to improve customer value and product market fit and address things, and hopefully our curve went up further. That's how you can see, quantify how much you're improving your product market fit, is how much are you moving your curve up over time and what's going on with that terminal value. So that's how you have hard proof. And if you want to see some real empirical data versus the theoretical data, this is real data from the Android App Store. And what they did is, again, you've got the retention curve, the percentage of users that are still active. This is now days, basically. And you can see what they've done is they've broken it out by the top 10 apps versus the next 50 versus the next 100 versus the next 500. Not surprisingly, the top apps in the App Store have the highest terminal value of retention rate. And as you get further down, they get lower and lower, right? So hopefully that solidifies that basically that terminal value of retention rate that all your brains knew when I did that quick little quiz is your measure of product market fit. Okay, so I've gone on a lot about retention and product market fit. Once we have that then, at some point we're going to want to turn to optimizing revenue. And at this point, we can't just stay generic. We have to focus on what is our business model for our particular business. What's our revenue model, right? And as I mentioned, I have an engineering background, so when I want to optimize something, I can't help but want to express it like an equation or quantitatively, so I can kind of do the derivative and set it to 0 and figure it all out. But you may be wondering, well, gosh, what equation should I use for my business? Well, one equation you can always start out with is revenue minus cost. And I call this defining the equation of your business. And what we want to do is peel the onion. At a high level, hey, let's go optimize revenue isn't useful. So what we want to do is break down this equation and express it with more detailed terms that we can then have discussions and debate among our team on with like, hey, do we think we should improve this one or this one? So I'm going to start out with one example for an advertising business model. Again, it's specific to your business model. So for an advertising business model, and in general, we're focused on maximizing revenue. The cost, the marginal cost usually isn't as big, and the whole point is the marginal revenue is going to increase, is going to pass it up over time. So in an ad business, basically revenue is generated when a visitor comes and basically visits your site, and you can think about, well, we can just take the number of visitors we have times how much revenue we generate per visitor. And it's usually the way you break down revenues, number of customers times revenue per customer, right? In the case of advertising, it may be a visitor instead of a customer. So that's the first level of peeling the onion. Then the ad revenue per visitor, that's like some aggregate number. How do we get to what that is? Well, it's basically how many ad impressions did we get per visitor on average, times some effective CPM, which is how much are we making on each ad impression. This is for display ads, basically, divided by 1,000 because CPM has 1,000 in it. Well, how do impressions per visitor, what drives that? Well, we can break that down into, and by the way, this is for a given time period, right? For a month or a year or a quarter or a week. Right, we're adding these numbers up. So in a given month, how many visits on average did each visitor come? Did they come once? Did they come 3 times? When they came, how many page views per visit on average? How many page views did they generate? And then basically, lastly, how many ad impressions do we have on average per page view? Right. So this is a way we can break this down. And now, instead of talking about some abstract thing like revenue or even ad revenue per visitor, we can go and say, okay, which of these do we think, where are we right now? Again, going back to the lean product process, where are we benchmark values? And which one do we think we can move the most? How would we improve visits per visitor? Well, we might ask people for their email address and send them an email and say, hey, here are top 5 articles, like Flipboard. Here's your 10 articles. Come back and check them out, right? So that you don't have to go. We pull people back. That would get them to come more frequently than if we didn't do that. Page views per visit. How might we improve that? You guys ever go to those sites where they break the news article across like 5 or 10 pages? Why are they doing that? They're doing that to improve that metric, right? Instead of having a long story, they want to be able to serve multiple page views so they can put more ads on each page, right? And finally, impressions per page view. You can improve that by slapping more ads on a page, basically. And obviously, at some point, you'll piss people off. You can go too far. But those are like the levers that you can play with to grow ad revenue per visitor. Back on the unique visitor side, it's almost always helpful to break down new visitors or new customers in the time period versus returning customers that signed up in a previous time period. And then basically, say we had some kind of viral loop where people can invite other people. We can break it down between invited and uninvited. And then for invited, we can break it out in a typical viral loop. So we went from this high-level revenue minus cost revenue, and we broke it down. And now each of these items, we can have discussions on the team about which one of these do we think we want to try to improve that's going to have the biggest impact. And this is all just one big equation, right? We could write this all out longhand, and profit would be unique visitors, new visitors plus returning visitors times all that. Let me quickly walk through another example. You can do it for any business, for a subscription business. Maybe some of you have subscription businesses. We could do it for e-commerce business as well. Again, revenue minus cost. We're going to break down revenue. Let's say our product has a free trial, like you were talking about, and a paid. After the free trial, you either sign up or you don't. So basically, our revenue is the number of paying users we have that month times the average revenue per paying user, and that's ARPU for short. Hopefully, you've heard of that before. Again, it's always helpful to break down users into the new ones that just started paying this month, plus the ones that were paying us before and decided to pay again this time. And all the repeat paying users is how many did we have in the last time period times 1 minus some cancellation or churn rate. And it turns out for subscription businesses, because of that 1 minus factor, churn rate is really, really high leverage, can be a high leverage factor that you can improve. Back on the paying users, again, say we had some free trial. So it's how many free trial users do we have and what percentage do we convert in that time period. The trial users, they may be coming from different channels, SEO, SEM, viral, and we could come up with some overall blended conversion rate or have a channel-specific conversion rate. So again, we can have discussions now about, hey, how can we improve the trial conversion rate? How can we improve, improve the cancellation rate? How can we improve the conversion rate for these different channels? And again, I mentioned this briefly before. One of the way you want to think about this is obviously there's real-time metrics and hourly metrics, but I think it's easiest to get your head around it as daily metrics, where each day is a row, and each of those metrics is basically a column. And those are the atomic metrics, as I mentioned. And as I said, ratio metrics can be much more powerful to track over time and normalize over time. So say that your CEO came and said, hey, how's our registration page? How good is it doing? It's like, well, it's great. We had 5,000 users yesterday. And the next day you get covered on TechCrunch. And all of a sudden you have 100,000 users. Your registration page didn't suddenly get better, right? So a better metric would be, hey, let's take the number of people that came to the page as a denominator. Let's take how many people actually completed a registration, divide those two, come up with a registration rate percentage that's between 0 and 100. That way, whether we're covered on TechCrunch or not, we can see if the percentage, how it compares over time. That makes you do better apples to apples over time. This is an example when you're tracking this data of, basically it's a time series. This is real data from a company I worked at. It's for a 9-month period. We were tracking the registration conversion rate. So this was a product that had basically free where you didn't have to register with an email, free where you could register with an email, and then they had paid. And they had different features that were unlocked as you moved up, right? So there were some features that you didn't have to register for, some that were free but you had to register for, some you had to pay for. And basically, you can see, number one, that the value changes a lot. It goes from like 30-some% all the way to 90-some% within 9 months. And the bottom line is every major change in this graph, it's got some noise, but every major change is because of a change that we made, either deliberately or accidentally. So let me walk you through it real quick. So we started out in January, and we had just started tracking. So we said, let's get a baseline. And we got a baseline, and we realized we're around 30-some%. We weren't happy with that registration conversion rate. We thought it could be better. We changed the messaging. The first change we made is we changed the messaging to better promote the features that you would get if you did register. And we saw an improvement, up to like 50-some% just by changing the messaging and focusing on that. It was the first social network and founded by Jonathan Abrams, and it was pretty popular. It was almost a victim of its own success, where we had so many users and like this crazy viral growth that the servers got really slow, and we had issues with uptime and performance, which kind of dogged us. And then MySpace basically came up and ate our lunch, and then Facebook came and ate MySpace's lunch. So this is like the early days of social networking. It was my first example of trying to optimize virality. So when I showed up at Friendster, and I mentioned that referral is important for certain businesses, it's especially important when there's network effects, like the more users you have create more value, like social products. And also when you know that you're probably not going to generate a high revenue per customer, so you can't afford to go out and buy customers. You need that free user acquisition to kind of bring your customer acquisition costs down. So everyone in the building, in the company, was like, wow, free new user acquisition through viral growth is really important. And I was like, great, what have we done on it so far? And nobody had actually kind of formally approached it the way that I was talking about. So I said, okay, great. Let's try to optimize it. Let's get rigorous about it. The first thing I did is let's define what the viral loop is. What's the user experience? And so at a high level, basically, we have active users, and they can invite prospective users to come, basically. And an email goes out when they invite their friends. The prospective users can either click on the email or not. If they click on the email, then they get to our registration page. They either get through that or they don't. If they get through it, they become users, a certain percentage of which are active. So this was basically like the foundation for the saying, great, now what metrics do I want to track for this loop or this process? And again, I focused on ratio metrics, not on absolute metrics. So basically, between the steps, the first metric I come up with is active user percentage, what we were talking about earlier. So of the users that we've registered, what percentage are active for that time period? Active users inviting their friends, we could just again say, hey, of the active users, what percentage in that month invited friends, sent invites to their friends? And there's a second metric that's relevant here, which is invites per sender, because when you invite your friends, you can invite 1, you can invite 10. There's a separate variable there too. So those two kind of documented that step. We had an invitation click-through rate on the email. There was just a CTR for what percentage of people click through. And then on the registration process, we had a conversion rate. So those 5 metrics basically were the metrics that I decided to use to track to try to optimize this loop. And if you multiply them together, they tell you what your viral ratio is. And again, as the head of PM here, I had to figure out, great, which one should I focus on? Which one offers the highest ROI opportunity? And so imagine you were in my shoes and you had to figure out how you wanted to grow this. I'll make it easier. Instead of 5, let's narrow it down to 3. So we'll focus on these 3. Think about which of these 3 you would focus on based on what you know. Percentage of users sending invites, invites per sender, and conversion rate. Which of those 3 would you think is the highest ROI and that you would spend your time and energy on? Who would vote for percentage of users sending invites? Who would focus on invites sent per sender? Okay. Who would focus on registration conversion rate? Okay, we got a lot of hands. Great. I kind of tricked you guys a little bit because remember I said that the step in the process, you need to know what the baseline values are. So I didn't tell you those. I kind of tricked you guys. So let's put the baseline values up, okay? So percentage of users sending invites is at 15%. Invites per sender is 2.3, so I'm inviting 2.3 friends each time I invite on average. And my registration conversion rate is 85%. Shall we revote? Now that we have this. This is the power. I do this trick not to be mean, but to show the power of just knowing the baseline. Where are we with the data? Just knowing that, again, just like the cohort curves, your brains kind of suddenly know what kind of situation we're in. Who would vote for the first thing now? Percentage of users sending invites. We got a lot more hands now, right? Why is that? Well, it's because the baseline value is low. Invites per sender. Who would vote for that one? About the same. How about conversion rate? Registration conversion rate. A lot fewer hands. Why? Because we're at 85% already, right? That's the power of knowing the baseline value. And what's going on there is your brain kind of knows, hey, I have a sense for what the upside potential is of each of those metrics. And what do I mean by upside potential? So let's take that registration conversion rate or process yield. Remember I said it's like a dial. The minimum value, what's the minimum value? 0. What's the maximum value? 100%, right? Where are we today? Let's plot where we are today. We're at 85%. So we can think about, and what your brain is doing is saying, well, what's the max we can probably improve? What's the max? I don't even know what the specific ideas would be, but assuming we knock it out of the park, what's the most we can improve this? Well, we can quantify that. We can say, basically, we're at 85%. We have 15 more percentage points that we can go up, and we can divide that by where we are, and that basically represents an 18% maximum improvement. No matter how good we are at UX design and marketing and product management and coding, we can only move that thing up to 100%, right? The second metric, percentage of users sending invitation. What's the minimum value there? 0. What's the maximum value there? 100%. Where are we today? 15%. Let's quantify. Again, we don't know if we can achieve this, but what's the maximum theoretical improvement here? Well, we have 85% of headroom that we could go up. We're sitting at 15%. If you divide those two, it's 570%. Again, not saying we could get that improvement, but theoretically speaking, there's a lot more headroom of what we could do. Does that make sense? Third one, average number of invites sent per sender. What's the minimum? 0. What's the maximum? Infinity. Anyone want to refine infinity? How many people in the world? Millions. How many people on the internet? A little less. So that's how it usually goes. People go, infinity! And then it's like, oh, there's so many people in the world, and there's so many people on the internet. And then you get down to, well, how many friends does the average person have, right? Where are we today? 2.3. You know, it's a little bit, we don't know what that maxing is. There's a number out there from sociology research that says the average person has about, on maximum 150 or 200 friends or so. So maybe we use the number 200, but, I don't know. What's the max possible improvement? I don't know what it could be. If we could get that to 10, that would be like almost a 5x. Could it be higher, right? So that's interesting. It's fundamentally different than those other two metrics. And I don't know, but my gut is, wow, I think there might be an opportunity here to do even more. And maybe it's a silver bullet metric. I don't know. Is anyone feeling a sense of deja vu from something I said earlier? Remember I said that there's 3 different types of profiles? There's the good, the bad ROI profile. That's kind of what registration process yield is. We're at the part of the curve where we've already kind of eked out the improvements, and we're at 85%. Good ROI curve, that's kind of seems like where we are potentially with percentage of users sending invitations. We're at 15%. There's a lot of room to go up. Number of invites per sender, I don't know. We don't know yet, but it seems like it might be one of these silver bullet metrics where we can really have a high multiple by making a small improvement. Right? So for those reasons, I basically chose to focus on that one. The other thing is, I didn't tell you this, you wouldn't know this, is at the time, this is back in 2004, you had to manually type in each of your friends' addresses, basically, in order to do it. So no wonder it was only 2.3 per send, right, per invite. So great. So we focus on that, and we say, great, we're going to pick that metric. Now we go into the metric optimization loop. For that metric, how do we increase the average number of invites sent per sender when they're inviting their friends? What are all of our ideas? Now is where we go into brainstorming mode. We brainstorm the ideas. For each one, how much do we think this is going to move the needle on that dial? How much time do we think it's going to take developer resource-wise? And we want to identify the highest ROI idea. And it's pretty commonplace today, but back then it wasn't. Our top idea was an address book importer. So people didn't have to type them in. They could just import 50, 100, 200 at a time, basically. And even there, we had to do an analysis because the way it worked is you had to build an importer for each specific mail service, Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail. You had to invest. And so what we did is we analyzed our user base, found the service that had the highest percentage of use, and that's the first one that we did for our MVP to see how it turned out. All right, so that's what we did. It took about 2 weeks of one engineer's effort to do this. Here's the metric, the before and after. So we were tracking along, like I said, at 2.3 invitations sent per time when somebody went to invite their friends. This is a 7-day average, so after you launch the improvement, it takes a little while to get to the new level. So we launched the address book importer, and it shot up to over 5. So it more than doubled, basically, just from doing 2 weeks of one engineer's effort. So that, and it turned out, was a silver bullet metric. Because we got twice as many people invited, we got twice as many active users. From the equation of the business, it just translated right through. So I was pretty psyched about that accomplishment. Yeah, and those days we hadn't built A/B testing, and so we were doing it before and after for both the examples that I shared. One of the risks there is there could be exogenous factors that's changing things. So the right way to do it, to avoid that, is to do A/B testing. And what you do is you test both scenarios with a certain percentage of traffic. And you can test multiple combinations if you want. And you end up with some output like this that shows you does the statistical analysis show, hey, is this really better? How confident are we that this is better? And which ones are worse, basically, right? So that's an example of applying the lean product technique. In that case, it happened to be for a viral loop, but you can use that same process for any metric. Last thing I want to cover is profitability. We've been focusing a lot on product market fit, acquisition, conversion, optimizing revenue. At some point, we want to focus on profitability. There's a particular way to look to slice and dice the equation of your business to kind of makes profitability easier to see and try to achieve. And that basically uses 2 key metrics. One is customer lifetime value. So now instead of looking at a certain time period like January, February, or March, you say, no, I'm going to look at each customer for the lifetime that they're with us and how much revenue do they bring in. That's customer lifetime value. And then the second one is customer acquisition cost. This is basically how much money do we need to pay to get someone all the way from to being a prospect to being converted to actually generating revenue for us. That's customer acquisition cost. And you kind of don't worry about some of the other costs in your business, but it's a way of looking at on a per user basis, your average user, like your per user economics, how much value they're going to make, how much revenue they're going to generate from us, and how much does it cost me to get them to that point. And to be profitable, you basically want your LTV to be higher than your CAC, so that it's basically greater than 0. Now for SaaS companies, yeah?
When you're still early on
Yeah.
in that product life cycle, I guess,
I mean, on the one hand, I'm trying to show like a sequence that makes sense here. If you don't yet have product market fit or high retention, I wouldn't even worry about it yet. So if you're really early, my point is I'm kind of working through these in order. It's like, okay, retention first, then conversion, then acquisition, then revenue, and then finally, okay, are we getting to the point where the curves are crossing? How can we do profitability? That being said, you can, when it's the appropriate time, you can do some back of the envelope. And I'll show you in a second. I'm going to do LTV. And so you can just make some hypotheses about these. And then as soon as you start launching, you can see if they're true or not. But let's go through these real quick. So,
Does that work?
yeah, just get close.
Can I hold it? Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
your light will be on. So why was acquisition number one? There you
Why
go.
acquisition's number one?
Yeah.
Our customers seem to have a natural churn rate, and we seem to convert them pretty well. So the more customers I can get into the pipeline, the more revenue we make.
Great. What did you say about your churn rate?
There seems to be a natural churn rate. Our
Okay.
customers are small micro businesses.
Got it. Like
Often
an
they churn
organic
usually.
churn you can't do much about, sounds like you're saying.
Yeah,
Cool, awesome, thanks for sharing. How about conversion? Who is number two? Or sorry, activation, number two. Raise your hands. Not tons of people here. Do you want to share why
Sure.
activation? The senator from Naboo.
That's right. So for us, obviously, we have a SaaS product with a really low barrier to entry, a low price point free trial. So for us, we get a lot of people that come to our site. They say, yeah, I want this product. They sign up for the product, and then they don't necessarily do anything. So as their trial expires, they just go away into Never Never Land. So for us, the activation phase is when they actually start getting engaged in the product, start to see the value of the product. They thought they had a need, they came to us, they thought they had a need, but somewhere between saying, yes, I want your trial, and yes, I want to pay you, there was something that got them distracted. So activation is where we want to focus right now.
Great, thanks a lot for sharing that. Awesome. How about three, retention? Raise your hand if you're focused on retention. Okay. Do you want to share why retention is the metric that matters most for your business?
We're actually really doing really well on acquisition and activation. Again, we're similar. We have like a low touch getting in. We have a lot of people who come in and activate, and we find that once they return, or once retention's at like 90 days, they turn to revenue really well. So just almost by process of elimination, we know retention is what we got to improve in our offering.
Great, awesome, thank you. How about referral? Does anybody is referral number one for somebody? Cool. Do you want to share why referral is the metric that matters most for your business right now?
You bet. So our thought was that referral essentially ties into the rest of them as well. So you've got clients that'll bring back business or they'll refer new business into you. That will just tie into the revenue side, the retention side, the activation, so on and so forth.
Okay, great. And how about revenue? Who's focused on number 5, revenue? Okay, we got a small number of people for each one. Do you want to share why revenue is the metric that matters most?
Yeah, so we had a fairly healthy debate. We have two different businesses here that we spoke about. So at the end of the day, the money keeps the whole thing going, and we felt that we wanted to have fun and keep going.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Money keeps the lights on. Okay, great, cool. Great, well hopefully you guys had a good discussion and comparing notes with your neighbors. There's no necessarily, it's not like there's a slam dunk right answer that's crystal clear per se for your business. It's very dynamic. And it kind of makes me wonder, and when I was doing this talk, is there some like overall order that makes the most sense to optimize these in? I don't know if you guys maybe thought about that too. It's like, hey, if you're building a new product or business, what's the right order to get from nothing to traction? And to make it simpler, let's just break it down to these three: acquisition, and again, I like the word conversion because you're converting prospects to customers, and retention. If you had to pick one of these three, and you're building not your business where you're at, but you're building a new business and you're trying to free product market fit, and you could only focus on one of these, who would focus on acquisition first? Raise your hand if you'd focus on acquisition first. Okay. Who would focus on conversion first? Okay. Who would focus on retention first? Okay, great. So we have a nice, healthy debate and difference of opinions. It's awesome. So the way I like to think about it, and again, this is kind of general advice. It doesn't apply in every single situation, kind of like it depends, is have you guys heard of the leaky bucket kind of metaphor? So let me walk through the leaky bucket metaphor. So I found this picture online of this kid spraying some water into a bucket. I think it's pretty cool. This is conversion, basically. Conversion is what percentage of the water, those water represent your prospective customers. What percentage are you getting into the bucket? The bucket means you capture them as customers, basically. So the water, again, is prospective customers. the amount you get into the bucket is customers. And this guy's, looks like maybe he's getting about half the water in the bucket, half of it is splashing outside, right? And that's, 50% conversion rate would probably be pretty good. So again, it's like, what is that percentage of people? So hopefully the metaphor makes sense that the water is prospects and the bucket represents our customer base, right? So what does great conversion look like? Well, great conversion means getting like a high percentage or all the water into the bucket. That's what conversion is. What is acquisition? Using this metaphor, acquisition is how much water are you spraying? Like what's the volume of water that you're spraying? Is it a little trickle? Or do you have like a big fire hose, like what great acquisition looks like basically, right? And again, the volume of water represents like the volume of prospects, like the number of prospects you're sending your way. Retention, continuing with this metaphor, is how leaky or non-leaky is your bucket. Once the water gets in the bucket, what percentage of those customers do you keep in there over time? And as we know, it's not 100%, right? People forget to come back, they kick the tires, they don't like it. All kinds of things happen. They switch to a competitor. So what does great retention look like? Great retention looks like basically having no holes or very small holes so that the water stays in the bucket over time. So in general, when I think of it that way, I think basically that it makes the most sense to focus on retention first. If you have a very leaky bucket and you go and spend all this money and time on a big fire hose, all that water is just going to leak right out of the bucket, right? So I would focus on retention first. And then secondly is conversion. If you have this big fire hose but you're not really good at getting the water in the bucket, it's just wasting money and resources basically. So the general wisdom is retention first up to a point where it's good enough, then conversion, and then acquisition, because then the time and money you're spending on acquisition is better spent. So that's a general way to approach it. So I also like to ask the question, we have those 5, let's open it up. It's not just those 5 metrics from R now, but if you're focused on product market fit, and for those of you that maybe are already there, just think about if you were trying to achieve it again, and you had one metric, you could only track one metric. I know a lot of people have dashboards with a lot of different metrics, but if you had to pick just one metric to measure how you're doing on product market fit, what would that be? I'd love to hear what people think they would track for them. Anybody want to say what they would track? Yeah.
I would probably go for retention.
Okay.
Mostly because people are going to find it organically or what have you. But if that bucket is leaking, then there's probably a whole host of problems that it could be, from like the product straight up not working, like there actually being errors. We could be down. There's more kind of unknowns in the retention.
Okay. And you brought up Rumsfeld, known knowns, known unknowns, unknowns. I know. So bonus points for that. That's awesome. He didn't know he was a product guy. Yeah, so that's great. Cool. Anybody have something else they would focus on? Yeah.
On the retention piece, but I'd back it up just a little bit and go active users.
Okay.
Because the retention is actually a lagging indicator of some other actions or non-actions, right?
Okay. So we got active users. Yes. What would you track?
I would track NPS.
NPS.
Yeah.
Okay, great. There's a net promoter score. So you ask a question on a scale of 0 to 10. How likely would you be to recommend this product? So, and you take it's really brutal. You take the 9s and 10s. You only get positive credit for them. You have to subtract all the 0 through 6s that you get, basically. So net promoter score. Okay. What else? Yeah. Revenue. He's all about the dollars. I like that. Okay, good. So we got revenue. What else? Anything else? Yeah. Chargebacks. Okay. Good. Sounds good. Are you in e-commerce? Okay, got it. All right. Any other thoughts? What? ARR, average recurring revenue. Okay, good. All right, good. I like it. Cool. Okay, good. So again, there's no one right answer, different opinions. The definition of profitability is that it's greater than, that LTV minus CAC is greater than 0. For a lot of businesses, especially SaaS businesses, that's not a high enough goal. So they actually do, instead of looking at the difference, they look at the ratio. And they want the ratio of the lifetime value of the customer divided by CAC to be 3 or more, basically. And that's the definition kind of for a lot of people of a healthy SaaS business, so software as a service. So let's go into lifetime value, as you were saying. Again, lifetime value and what the formula is, it's basically how much value your average customer will generate for you. Right? And obviously it changes over time, but it's you can basically weigh, and it's an average, right? Some people will generate more, some people will generate less, but it's a number that you can use. And so how do you calculate? What are the factors? It's that average revenue per user per time period, so say $10 per month, times the average customer lifetime, okay, they stick around for 10 months, times some gross margin, basically. And those are the three factors that you take into account. Average revenue per user, it's, like I said, you can just say like, okay, great, let's take all these users, basically, take these 100 users and see how much money they generate from us, and then divide it by 100. That would be an example of your average revenue per user, basically. Customer lifetime, this is, okay, great, they're paying us $10 a month. Are they sticking around 10 months on average or 12 months on average, right? And then we can just multiply those two to get what the product is. And there's a hack here where basically there's a relationship between the average lifetime and your churn rate, which is just 1 over your churn rate. So if you have a 5% monthly churn, that means on average, your average users are 20 months. And so the last piece is gross margin. Honestly, this is the least important piece. This is just trying to take into account the other costs of delivering the service to people. For software products, they're usually like 70, 80, even 90%. So you don't even really need to take it into account. And beyond that, if you go online, you'll see some more complicated formulas that try to take into account what's called the cost of capital, like the value of money over time, because you're not making all this money from the customer in month one. It's distributed over time, but especially with today's low interest rates and stuff, it's just not worth the complexity. What really matters the most is the ARPU. How much am I making on average per user per month? And how long are they sticking around? What's the customer lifetime? Those are the two factors. So back to your question, you could, in the beginning, you don't know, so you make some hypotheses and you say, hey, your ARPU, you should know, is set by your pricing. If you're charging people $10 a month, then you know your ARPU is $10 a month. What you don't know is how many months are people going to do it, or what percentage of people are going to do it. But you know what the price is going to be. When you have multiple products, like when I worked for You Send It in Box, we had tiered pricing. So like the lowest plan was 10, the next one was 30 per month, the next one was 50. Your ARPU will be a blended weighted percentage of those, basically. So that's LTV. Customer acquisition cost, it's the average cost for you to obtain a revenue-generating customer. It takes into account two things. It takes into account acquisition. So how do I get someone to get to our conversion funnel to see if they get through to become a prospect, your cost per acquisition, and then also your conversion rate. Great, I got 100 people there. What percentage actually went through and became revenue-generating customers? It can vary by channel. I'm sure those of you that have been doing this know that, for one channel you can pay more per customer than other channels. And usually as you work on a channel, when you first hit a new fresh channel, you might see high returns, but over time you might see diminishing returns as you kind of fish that pond. But it basically takes those two factors into account. It's your cost per acquisition divided by your conversion rate, right? So if you can decrease your cost per acquisition, your CAC will go down. If you can improve your conversion rate, your CAC will go down. And what you want to see over time is something like this. You want to see LTV bigger than CAC, obviously, so that you're profitable. And you want to see LTV increasing over time. Why is it increasing over time? Because your team is adding more and more functionality and hopefully value to your product. You're improving your user experience. You're fixing bugs. You're getting better customer retention. Maybe you're optimizing your pricing. You're able to charge people that are getting more value, a little bit more, a little price differentiation. That's how you're increasing your LTV. Conversely, your CAC, you want to see that go down over time. As you get better at marketing and really understanding your customer and segmenting and market messaging them, you should see that go down over time. Again, I like to complement these kind of theoretical ideas with real data. Luckily, HubSpot happened to post their LTV to CAC ratio for 6 quarters. From Q1 2011 to Q2. And what you can see is, make it a little bigger actually since we got the small screen. You can see that we can see which elements really kind of contributed the most to improving that ratio. So you can see the ratio, the top line, LTV to CAC, it went from 1.7, which is below that 3 threshold, in 2011 Q1, all the way to 4.7. And you can see they broke out each line item, CAC, customer acquisition cost, MRR churn, what's their monthly churn rate, average MRR, what's their monthly recurring revenue, that's the ARPU, software margin, that's the gross margin, and then LTV that they calculate from the formula there. So what are the top things that led to them basically having a better ratio of LTV to CAC? What pops out for you guys? Did they decrease their CAC? Did they spend less on per customer? No, they actually increased it, right? They increased it. The churn went down, yeah. And the churn went from 3.5 to 2. And that may sound like not that much because it's like, hey, it's just 1.5%. But what you need to look at is the ratio. That's a pretty good improvement. And because it's a 1 minus term in the equation of the business, that's very high leverage, right? 2% back using that hack, that means the average customer is 50 months. 3.5, if we divide 1 by that, it's probably more something a little less than 30 months. So they took their average lifetime from under 30 to over 50 months by decreasing their churn. What else? The margin is pretty much the same, 81, 82, 83. That's not materially different. The MRR, they grew from 429 to 583. So the two main things, they actually increased their CAC. That made the ratio go down, but the churn was the primary thing, and the MRR was a secondary thing. All right? Cool. So in summary, to recap this lean product process, hopefully these examples I've used help bring this to life, but you want to start out by figuring out what are the metrics for our business, right? You've got Dave McClure's R at a high level, and then you've got the equation of the business where you focus on your specific business. Figure out those baseline values. We saw with my trick question the value of just knowing the baseline values. You really don't know where you're at and what's going to offer the best ROI. Once you have those baseline values, you can look across your metrics and just use the same way we did with that Frenzer study and say, which ones do we think offer the highest upside potential? Pick that top metric, whether it's conversion rate or acquisition or retention rate or churn rate, whatever it is, and then go and work on that metric. Focus on that metric. And if you have multiple teams, you can actually have one team focus on one metric and another one on another metric. But for each of those metrics, the team should go into this metric level loop where they brainstorm ideas, figure out which one they think has the highest ROI, design it, launch it, and see what happens. And again, even if it doesn't go up and to the right, you learn. And then as you get diminishing returns, switch back to a different metric that's going to offer higher ROI. And I created this new slide for this talk today because as I was talking through, we've got the pirate metric, startup metric for pirates that are. I think there is again, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I think there is kind of a generally prevailing wisdom of, in general, the order to do these in. And I'm a big proponent of starting out with retention rate first, that improving that product market fit, right? Again, back to the leaky bucket, spending a lot of time, making your hose spray more water or trying to get more water in the bucket doesn't make a lot of sense if you've got a leaky bucket. So first, shore that up, get to the point where you've got good product market fit. Then focus on conversion, which is basically getting good at converting prospects to customers, how to explain your value prop to get more water into the bucket. And then at that point, you have a decision to make. You can bridge. There's no right answer here, but basically you may focus on revenue. You may say, you know what, what's most important for our business is getting that customer lifetime value up, increasing ARPU, decreasing churn. Or you may basically say, no, what's important to us at this point is acquisition and getting more prospects. And the reality is you might be working these a little bit in parallel. But basically figuring out, okay, great, we've got good retention, we've got good conversion. Let's go experiment with different marketing channels and get a lot of people in there. And there's an argument to be made there that you may not fully know all the customer segments that are relevant yet, so acquisition will help you get exposure and discover who are the people that really like your product the most. And for certain subsets of business, as I mentioned, like social networks or other places where referral is really important, that really helps benefit acquisition. It's basically kind of free or cheap user acquisition if you're using viral loops to grow. And then if you focus on revenue first or acquisition first, at some point you're going to want to flip-flop and focus on the other one, basically, right? Once one of them is doing well, you're going to want to spend some time and attention on the other. And then eventually when you get to the point where your LTV is really strong and your CAC is going down, you'll get to profitability, basically. So, again, there's no one magical answer. This is just kind of general advice. You may be in a business where referral is so critical you need to work on that after retention rate, for example. But in general, for a lot of businesses, this is a good kind of diagram, a playbook to figure out how you want to go about tackling stuff. So it's been a pleasure talking with you guys. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at Dan Olsen. Again, I post my talks on dan-olsen.com. My email's there. I have a really short NPS survey, basically bit.ly/danmetrics. If you guys could take a minute to let me know what you liked, what could have been better, that would be great. I will, I'll take some questions right now. At the end, I'll go on Twitter and pick 2 winners. I also have a few other copies for people. So with that, I'd love to open it up to any questions that you guys have.
The metrics, the example with Friendster, the metrics obviously were like 85% versus 15%, so in that example it was really clear.
Sure.
How would you start deciding if those metrics were a lot more similar? So if you had like 20% and 25%.
Sure. Well, and I had already simplified it. There were 5, and I just simplified it to 3.
Right.
So usually you have, 3 to 5 metrics that you can optimize. And so if you've got 5, there's going to be a natural spread. So when you first start, you might still have a bigger spread. It may not be as obvious as 1585, but you may have 20 versus 60. You'll still do the 20. Eventually, you'll get to the scenario you're saying where it's like, hey, they're all kind of 20, 25, 30. What do we do, right? And that's where it may be less about, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to the same thing, which is, okay, great, for these metrics, what are all the ideas we have for how we think we can make them better? How much do we think each idea is going to move the needle? And how much resources is going to take? So you can run them all through that high, medium, low ROI filter. And what can happen is if the return ends up being similar, then the I drives it more. It's like, oh, this one's only going to take a day. This one's going to take a month. Okay, just do the day one. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The I can drive it more, but you can still apply that same general technique. Yeah. Yes.
What are your thoughts on locking customers into a long-term contract to, reduce churn, but at the end of it, the churn goes way up?
That's not, so the funny thing about retention rate is that comes up a lot. It's like, well, they signed a contract. It's like, yeah, if you're in a contract world, just think of retention rate as what's my contract renewal rate.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.